Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Did you know that millions of people today live in areas at risk of natural disasters like hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis? Everyone wants a good view, and living in a volatile place is worth it, sometimes. In this video, we'll explore some of the most dangerous places on Earth people have called home. Right on the cliff. Perched precariously on the edge of a cliff, this monastery forced monks to live life on the edge for centuries. The Sumela Monastery is just outside of Trabzon, Turkey. As you can imagine, living here was pretty perilous for the monks who balanced prayer and contemplation with the constant awareness of the sheer drop below. Just one wrong step and they would plunge nearly 4,000 feet to their doom. But hundreds of monks made this place their home to escape from enemy attacks. Although it is so old, there are no records of who built it or when. Legend says that two Greek Orthodox monks from Athens, Saint Sophronios and his uncle, Saint Barnabas, wandered into a cave where they saw an image of the Virgin Mary. They were deeply moved, and right then and there, they decided to build a monastery dedicated to the Virgin Mary on that very spot. The Sumela Monastery was then established in 386 AD and became a major location for monks and pilgrims. However, some historians think the religious complex has been around a lot longer than that. This place is even bigger than it seems. The main buildings of the monastery complex include its rock church, kitchens, chapels, student rooms, a library, a guest house, and a fountain. This fountain collected spring water directly from the mountain, which was sacred to the Greeks. It is covered in frescoes inside and out with biblical scenes, mostly of the story of Christ and the Virgin Mary. Sumela Monastery is one of the oldest and most historic monasteries in the Christian world, and it is still revealing its secrets. In 2017, archaeologists were doing some restoration work on the monastery and made an incredible discovery. At the end of a hidden passage was a chapel that had been sealed off over the years. Inside was a treasure trove of vibrant murals depicting scenes of life and death and heaven and hell. This chapel is believed to be far older than the rest of the complex, likely built during a time when Christianity wasn't as popular in the area, and Christians had to worship deep in the forest and in caves. Over its long history, the monastery fell into disrepair several times, but was rebuilt by different emperors. In the 6th century, it was restored and expanded on the orders of Emperor Justinian of the Byzantine Empire. In the 13th century, Trabzon and nearby areas came under the control of the Komnenos dynasty that separated from the Byzantine Empire. Trabzon became their capital, and between 1349 and 1390, the monastery was greatly expanded and grew very wealthy over the years. Even when the Ottomans invaded the area in 1461, the Sultan ordered that Sumela Monastery be protected. It's amazing it wasn't torn to the ground, maybe because it's practically glued to the cliff. There is a large building with a balcony on the cliffside that had incredible views for those monks that weren't afraid of heights. They must have been incredible architects and builders as well. Sumela's rock church is a very unique building. It seems to be crammed right into the corner of the mountain, but that's not what makes this church so interesting. It's the church's interior and exterior that really catches your eye, decorated in more colorful frescoes. From the 15th to the 18th century, they went wild with the artwork. It is incredible that the church still survives to this day, even though the entire complex was abandoned in 1923. In the past few years, much of the monastery has been restored, and it serves as an outdoor museum that draws in visitors from around the world. Would you like to visit this cliffside monastery? Just be careful not to lean too far over the edge. Chernobyl's Ghost City. The city of Pripyat was abandoned overnight. The silent victim of the Chernobyl disaster lives on as a chilling reminder of the events that happened on April 26, 1986. Back then, living next to a nuclear power plant was considered pretty safe. Before the sirens wailed, Pripyat was a bustling Soviet city with schools and parks. The Ferris wheel now stands frozen in time, a silent sentinel over the abandoned city. On that fateful April day, around 50,000 people were forced to evacuate their homes in Pripyat, Ukraine, to escape the cloud of radioactive dust following the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. They were told to only bring essential documents like identity papers, along with a small supply of food and clothing. Everyone was told they would only be gone for a few days, but not a single soul returned. On the 26th of April every year, former residents meet up to remember what happened on that day and honor those that were lost. They come to visit the memorial to firefighters and the workers who died in the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. They say they can't go back, so they have to move forward. 59-year-old Sergei Shedrakov and his wife Alexandra recall being herded like sheep and evacuated from this city with their 2 young children in less than 4 hours. At the time, there wasn't a lot of panic, it was just a precaution. But looking back now, the whole experience was far more terrifying than they realized. Alexandra once worked at a post office in Pripyat. Everyone in the town relied on the power plant. They all worked there. Nobody gave any thought to the threat of radiation until it was too late. In recent years, brave souls have ventured into this ghost town to get a peek at its ruins. YouTuber Adam Mark, a self-proclaimed urban explorer who roams around abandoned places, visited Pripyat in the fall of 2021, just a few months before Russia invaded Ukraine. He wasn't too concerned that the city is located near the center of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, where radioactive contamination is said to be extremely high. However, he did monitor the radiation levels he was exposed to during his visit. He filmed his whole experience for his channel, Adam Mark Explores. Even after being abandoned for 36 years, Mark still found remnants of the everyday lives of Pripyat's former inhabitants. There was a haunting silence all around. One building that really surprised him was the kindergarten, which was still littered with children's shoes and toys. In his video, he described it as the closest thing he has ever seen to an apocalyptic world. The city's hospital was also spooky, still full of medical supplies and equipment. Mark also saw other buildings and businesses in various states of decay being reclaimed by nature. The town was just 2 miles away from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant when the accident occurred. The plant's reactor number 4 exploded, setting off a chain reaction of destruction and devastation. It was the first nuclear energy disaster to be rated at maximum severity. The response involved over 500,000 personnel and cost an estimated $700 billion. To this day, it is still the worst nuclear disaster in history, as well as the most expensive. Before disaster struck, Pripyat was a shining example of Soviet atomic age futurism. According to Professor Andrei Korobkov from Middle Tennessee State University, it was a very nice place. It was a complete community. Its shops were well stocked, its hospitals and clinics fully equipped, and its cultural offerings included a theater, sports halls, and even an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Residents eagerly anticipated the May Day inauguration of a new amusement park, complete with a Ferris wheel, swing boats, and brightly colored bumper cars. However, the Chernobyl disaster shattered these dreams. And although Pripyat was built to accommodate nuclear workers, it wasn't linked to the Soviet nuclear weapons program, which means it was open to outsiders. Can you believe people once took vacations here? It's difficult to imagine now. After the explosion, Pripyat was declared too radioactively dangerous for human occupation. Experts have said it will be at least 3,000 years for the area to become safe, while others believe this is way too generous. It is thought that the reactor site will not become habitable again for at least 20,000 years, according to a 2016 report. As time marched on, the empty town became overgrown with vines and trees, making it hard to believe that it once had a population of 50,000. Today, Pripyat stands as a haunting ghost town, but surprisingly, some residents have returned to their homes, willing to take the risk. Pripyat and 94 other villages are part of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. But if you are really into dark tourism, you can go visit for yourself. Of course, there are important guidelines and restrictions you have to follow. Would you add this place to your bucket list? And now for a quick break because it's shout out time. I want to give a big thank you to John DeRion Ely and Patricia Neri. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, you know what to do. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the family. The city swallowed by the sea. What would you do if you suddenly came face to face with a towering wall of water? I mean, what can you really do except try to run? At that point, your fate is pretty much sealed. Unfortunately, this is what happened to the residents of Helike. Helike was a very famous ancient Greek city in the northern Peloponnese. It was known for its trading activities and was a significant cultural, religious, and political center in ancient Greece. Everyone thought it was invincible, until suddenly it disappeared beneath the waves like the lost city of Atlantis. This city was particularly devoted to Poseidon, the god of the sea, who was believed to protect sailors and traders setting off on their voyages. Pretty ironic, considering what happened. They must have done something to make Poseidon angry. Helike's influence spread far and wide, establishing colonies in distant lands like Anatolia and Italy. Some scholars even speculate that the dramatic fate of Helike may have inspired Plato's tale of Atlantis. In 373 BC, disaster struck Helike in the form of a massive earthquake. The quake caused the land beneath the city to liquefy and sink, and a terrifying tsunami followed, engulfing the city in water. Unlike the common belief that Helike slid into the sea, the reality was that the sea rushed over the sinking city, drowning it in its wake. Ancient accounts describe how the earthquake and tsunami erased Helike from the map, leaving it buried under the earth and sea. In the years that followed, stories about the lost city continued to circulate. The Greek scholar Eratosthenes visited the site in the late 3rd century BC. He reported that local sailors could still see the statue of Poseidon beneath the water. The statue, holding a hippocamp, a mythical sea creature, was a hazard for fishermen, as their nets often got tangled in it. But despite these reports, the exact location of Helike was eventually lost. The area was silted over and the ruins disappeared beneath layers of sediment. For centuries, Helike remained a mystery, with many believing it had sunk into the Gulf of Corinth. Throughout the 20th century, researchers searched the waters off the coast, hoping to uncover the lost city. However, the search yielded no results. The breakthrough came in the early 2000s, when Professor Dora Katsunopoulou of the Helike Project decided to take a fresh look. She went back to the ancient texts and realized that perhaps Helike was not under the sea. She suggested that the city had been buried under a lagoon that formed after the earthquake, rather than being lost in the open waters of the Gulf of Corinth. With this new theory in mind, Dr. K and her team shifted their search. Finally, their persistence paid off. Digging through layers of ancient river sediments, they uncovered the remains of an entire lost city, matching the description of Helike. The ruins showed signs of a thriving settlement dating back centuries. It also bore clear evidence of destruction and fire in the layer corresponding to the 4th century BC. This was precisely when Helike was said to have been destroyed. Among the ruins, archaeologists also found traces of marine life, confirming that the city had been underwater for a time. After centuries of mystery, the lost city of Helike was finally found, not beneath the waves, but buried beneath the earth. It had been there all along. Poveglia Island. This beautiful little island is actually a house of horrors. Also known as Plague Island, it is said to be haunted by restless spirits. The history of Poveglia Island is dark and sad. The people who lived here didn't do so by choice. It is definitely not somewhere you'd want to visit on your Italian vacation, unless that is you're a fan of all things creepy. Poveglia's story begins as far back as 421 AD, but it wasn't until the 16th century that its grim reputation truly took hold. When the plague was ravaging Europe, the island became a dumping ground for the sick and the dead from the city of Venice. The disease were transported there and mass graves were dug to accommodate them. These pits were eventually set on fire or covered with dirt, leading some to claim that Poveglia's soil is made up of 50% human ashes. Going to Poveglia Island was a one-way trip. Imagine being sick and too weak to protest as you're tossed on a boat. The sight of doctors in bird-like masks must have been terrifying. The beaks of these masks were supposedly filled with herbs for the purpose of purifying the illness from the air. Those masks were ineffective, of course, as the plague was bacterial, not viral, but at least they helped to cope with the stench of fire and death in the air. The island's haunted past didn't end there. In 1922, a psychiatric hospital was built on Poveglia Island. The patients weren't exactly treated, they were tortured. The hospital's director, a madman said to be obsessed with lobotomies, eventually lost his own mind and threw himself from the clock tower. He was supposedly driven mad by the spirits of his victims. The hospital still stands today, although it has been abandoned since 1968. Locals say it is teeming with ghosts, and I don't doubt that at all, do you? Much later, when modern researchers descended on the island and reopened these mass graves, they got an even more disturbing surprise. Corpses with large rocks jammed in their mouths. But why? This bizarre practice stemmed from the belief that some of the dead were vampires. Their bloated bodies and bloodied mouths were mistaken as signs that they had been feeding on other corpses. To stop them from coming back, people placed stones in their mouths, hoping they would starve to death. Fishermen today avoid the island, steering clear of its cursed shores. Those who venture too close claim to hear screams, see ghostly figures, and feel an overwhelming sense of dread. The government has sealed it off from the public, but thrill seekers and ghost hunters still remain eager to explore its haunted ruins, if they can find someone brave enough to take them there. Cursed for eternity. The eerie silence that now lingers over the deserted ruins of the Kuldara has given rise to one of India's most enduring legends. Once a flourishing settlement of Paliwal Brahmins, a group known for their ability to bend nature to their will, it was suddenly abandoned in the early 19th century. But why? Could a curse be to blame? Listen to this and let me know what you think in the comments. The story begins in the 18th century when Salim Singh, a powerful and tyrannical Rajput ruler, cast his greedy eyes on Kuldara. Singh was notorious for his harsh rule and ruthless demands, and he became infatuated with the village chief's beautiful daughter. He ordered the villagers to hand her over, threatening dire consequences if they refused. But the villagers were unwilling to surrender one of their own to the cruel leader, so they made a desperate decision. They would flee their homes rather than submit to Singh's demands. According to legend, the villagers left overnight, abandoning their prosperous village to the desert sands. But before they disappeared, they cursed Kuldara, ensuring that no one would ever be able to settle there again. The curse was believed to be so powerful that anyone who tried to live in the village would be doomed to failure and misfortune. Since that fateful night, Kuldara has remained empty. The village's crumbling streets and empty houses stand as haunting reminders of its mysterious past. Many who visit the site today report feeling uneasy, as if the village itself is alive with the ghosts of its former residents. Some claim to hear whispers in the wind or see shadows moving among the ruins, while others have fled in terror from the unsettling silence that envelops the village. Historians, however, believe there are more mundane reasons to explain the village's abandonment. Economic hardship, possibly worsened by Salim Singh's oppressive taxes sucking them dry, could have driven the villagers out, and environmental challenges like drought only made things worse. The people were used to extreme weather since archaeologists have found an advanced water management system. But things must have gotten worse and worse. The harsh weather and no water would have made this a very difficult place to live. Excavations at Kuldara have unearthed well-planned streets, houses, and a complex network of canals and dams, indicating that the village was once a very popular place. Plenty of pottery and tools have been found at the site, but none of these artifacts have revealed why the village was abandoned or where its people went. While the true fate of Kuldara's residents remains a mystery, the legend of the village's curse continues. Today, Kuldara is a popular destination for tourists and paranormal enthusiasts, all drawn to its mysterious history and the possibility of uncovering the secrets of its ghostly past. The Lion City. A lake in China is hiding the remains of an ancient city that once housed approximately 300,000 people. Xicheng, or the Lion City, is now submerged under about 130 feet of water. Surprisingly, though, the city is still completely intact and remarkably well preserved. The water transformed Lion City into a time capsule, preserving its ruins for curious divers. So what happened? Was there a flood or an earthquake? Nope, not even close. Imagine having a relaxing day at home when all of a sudden you hear a knock at the door. You weren't expecting company, so you're hesitant to answer, not knowing who might be standing there. We've all had that feeling. Instead of a neighbor or a family member, you find a soldier. He has come to give you a message from the Chinese government. He says that in the coming months, everyone in Xicheng will be relocated by force if necessary to make room for a new hydroelectric power station. Your family has lived in the city for hundreds of years, but you have no choice. You must leave. This is what happened to the residents of Xicheng in 1959. Their hometown, with more than 1,400 years of history, was purposely submerged, and they had virtually no say in the matter. The government literally tried to drown any memory of the Lion City, but it didn't exactly work. 50 years after Xiandao Lake swallowed Xicheng, images of the sunken city began to circulate online. The Chinese government had secretly organized an operation in 2001 to see what remained. They were surprised to find that it was largely intact, with many carvings, structures, arches, and guarding lions still upright. The place was nicknamed Lion City after Wuxi Mountain, or Five Lion Mountain, which towered over the city when it was first established. Lions are carved all over the place. As the pictures began to spread, the underwater city has become a tourist attraction and popular spot for divers. If you want to go, just know that you may need to get permits or arrange a guided dive to explore the submerged city. If you go, be sure to let me know. Japan's concrete battleship. Hashima Island is a haunting reminder of the dark side of Japan's industrial past. It earned its nickname because all of those enormous concrete structures look like a big battleship from a distance. It once bustled with life and activity, but the island's story is one of both innovation and hardship, mostly the latter. Originally a small, rocky island, Hashima became a focal point for coal mining during Japan's Industrial Revolution. Mitsubishi transformed it into a fortress of reinforced concrete, building not just mining facilities, but also a self-contained city for the workers. By 1916, the island was home to the world's first reinforced concrete apartment building, and it continued to expand, with more buildings, breakwaters, and tunnels being added to accommodate the growing population. At its peak, Hashima had the highest population density in the world, with narrow alleys, towering structures, and little room to breathe. Where there's industry, there are tough conditions. Almost no fresh air, poor working conditions, overcrowding, you name it. Life on Hashima Island was tough, to say the least. The island was constantly battered by violent weather, and its extreme humidity, combined with coal dust in the air, made the living conditions brutal. Respiratory problems were common, and fires broke out all the time. But the workers stayed. They were lured in by wages that were higher than those on the mainland, and the promise of a better life. Homes on the island were equipped with the latest technology of the time, making Hashima appear prosperous on the surface. But beneath this veil of wealth was a much darker reality. During World War II, Hashima became a site of forced labor, where Korean and Chinese captives were forced to work in the dangerous mines. Escape was impossible, and many lives were lost. This dark chapter in the island's history has caused ongoing diplomatic tensions, especially when UNESCO considered listing it as a World Heritage Site in 2015. As the demand for coal dwindled and Hashima's resources were depleted, the island's population began to go down too. On April 20th, 1974, Mitsubishi officially shut down the mines and abandoned the island, forcing the remaining inhabitants to leave. For decades, Hashima was left to the elements, a ghost island frozen in time. It wasn't until 2001 that the island found new life as a tourist attraction. The crumbling concrete structures, once symbols of progress and innovation, now stand as silent witnesses to a bygone era. Despite its haunting atmosphere, Hashima Island continues to attract visitors. Or maybe because of it. The Fall of Acrotii. Living near an active volcano is always a bit of a risk, but people still do it all the time. In 1967, archaeologists began digging at Acrotii, a prehistoric town on the Aegean island of Thera, now known as Santorini. What they found was astonishing. A town with buildings still standing 2 or even 3 stories high, frozen in time. Over 50 years later, the secrets of this extraordinary settlement are still being uncovered. At first, it was believed that an earthquake had saved many lives in Acrotii. During the late Bronze Age, the island was shaken by a powerful tremor. Buildings made of stone, held together with just clay, earth, and straw, were seriously damaged. Beautiful frescoes were torn from the walls and smashed to pieces as the structures crumbled. But oddly, no bodies were found in the wreckage, leading experts to think that the residents had been wise enough to evacuate. But this earthquake was only the beginning. Thera was an active volcano, and not long after the earthquake, it erupted with devastating force around 1650 BC, burying the town under tons of pumice and ash. Recent evidence suggests that some residents of Acrotii decided to stay after the quake. Instead of running for the hills, they started rebuilding their homes, not realizing that the real catastrophe was about to strike. As the volcano erupted, they likely tried to escape, but they may not have made it far enough. It's possible their remains could still be buried somewhere west of the town. This catastrophic event, known as the Minoan eruption, was one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history. It had a significant impact not only on the Aegean island, but the whole entire region for miles. The discovery of Acrotii began in 1967 when Professor Spiridon Marinatos started digging to prove a theory. He believed that the volcanic eruption had led to the downfall of the Minoan civilization on Crete. What he found, however, was even more remarkable. He uncovered well-preserved buildings from a prehistoric town, some with rooms decorated in stunning wall paintings. These discoveries were so remarkable that Marinatos dedicated the rest of his life to excavating the site. To protect this archaeological treasure, a shelter was built over the town, and in 1999, a more sophisticated roof was installed, blending into the landscape and keeping the site cooler for visitors. This project also allowed archaeologists to dig deeper into the history of Acrotii. They learned that the city grew from a small settlement in the Neolithic period to a bustling, cosmopolitan merchant town by the late Bronze Age. One of the more mysterious discoveries at the site is the so-called House of the Benches. It earned its name thanks to the rows of seating that can be found on either side of a narrow entranceway within the building. Unlike other houses within the city, this one lacks the typical artifacts or frescoes, hinting that it may not have been a home at all. Instead, researchers believe it could have been used for some unknown, possibly ritualistic purpose. The last home on Holland Island. An island has one job: to remain above water, and Holland Island couldn't even do that. Holland Island was once a thriving community in Chesapeake Bay, but now it exists only in memories and old photographs. Settled in the 1600s and named after colonist Daniel Holland, it was a quiet place until the 1850s when a fishing and farming boom brought new life to its shores. By 1910, Holland Island was booming with nearly 360 residents, making it the most populated island in Chesapeake Bay. The island had everything from homes and shops to a school, post office, and even a baseball team. Nearly 90 vessels called Holland Island home, their crews making a living from fishing, crabbing, and oyster dredging. But the island's beauty was deceiving. Unlike other land masses with solid rock foundations, Holland Island was made of mud and silt, making it vulnerable to erosion. The gradual sinking of the Earth's crust, combined with rising sea levels, caused the island to lose shoreline pretty quickly. By 1914, the islanders began to notice the land disappearing. Just think about how horrifying that would be. Desperate to save their home, they tried building walls, importing stones, and even sinking boats to protect the shoreline. But their efforts were all in vain. In 1918, a tropical storm hit the island, damaging the church and forcing the last family to leave. The island was utterly abandoned. For decades, Holland Island sat neglected, slowly being swallowed by the sea. But in 1995, Stephen White, a Methodist minister and former waterman, bought the island for $70,000. Is that a good investment, buying a sinking island? White was determined to preserve its legacy. He founded the Holland Island Preservation Foundation and spent 15 years trying to save this sorry hunk of land. Stephen built breakwaters, laid sandbags, and brought tons of rocks to the island, but the relentless waves devoured them all. He even sunk a barge to break the waves. But by the time Stephen realized the fight was too great, the island had shrunk by 20 acres, and he had spent nearly $150,000 on his efforts. In 2010, Stephen got sick, and he sold the island to the Concord Foundation. They commissioned a photographer to take aerial photos of the island, capturing the last images of the lone Victorian house that had stood since 1888. In mid-October 2010, the house finally collapsed into a heap, unable to withstand the elements any longer. Over the next few months, the sea claimed the wreckage, and by 2012, Holland Island was completely gone. A once thriving community now lost to the sea. Today, only the memories of those who lived there and the haunting images of the last house standing remain. The Martyred Village. During wartime, nowhere is really safe to live, and some areas will suffer more than others just because. On June 10, 1944, the peaceful village of Oradour-sur-Glane was forever changed by a horrific act of violence. Before World War II, Oradour-sur-Glane was a peaceful village in central France, but that peace was shattered when German Waffen SS troops massacred 642 men, women, and children, reducing the village to smoldering ruins. The town is now a haunting reminder of the brutalities inflicted by the Nazis during the war. The perpetrators of this atrocity were part of the Der Führer Regiment, a division within the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich. This unit had a notorious reputation, having been involved in brutal operations on the Eastern Front against the Soviets. Under the command of Heinz Bernhard Lammerding, they were no strangers to retaliatory violence. Following the Allied D-Day invasion, Das Reich was ordered to move north to support German forces and suppress any resistance. Unfortunately, Oradour was caught in their path. On that fateful morning, the villagers of Oradour woke up to what they thought would be a typical day. By afternoon, however, their town was surrounded by between 120 and 200 SS soldiers. The soldiers herded all of the villagers into the town square. Initially, the villagers thought this was a routine identification check, but soon the families were separated. What happened next was horrific. The men were shot with machine guns, and the women and children were locked inside the village church. The SS threw grenades into the church and then set it on fire. Those who tried to escape were killed. The entire village was then burned to the ground, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation. Only 7 villagers survived the massacre. Among them was Madame Marguerite Ruffenche, who miraculously escaped from the church after being shot 5 times. She hid in the garden until she was rescued. The reason behind the massacre remains unclear. Some believe it was in retaliation for the assassination of Major Helmut Kampf by the French resistance. However, survivors maintained that Oradour had no ties to the resistance. Others think Oradour was simply an unfortunate target. From one day to the next, this town had become one of the scariest places anyone had ever lived. The ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane now stand as a national memorial, preserved just as they were in 1944. This site is a powerful symbol of the horrors of war.
Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Dragon's Breath Cave. Dragon's Breath Cave is a spectacular and terrifying place in the African country of Namibia. It was discovered in 1986, deep in the sandy wasteland of the Kalahari Desert. Within this landscape of desert sand and waterless scrublands, the cave is almost invisible. Its entrance is little more than a shadow, a dark and yawning cave mouth that leads down into darkness. The cave earned its unique name because when it was discovered by a team with the South African Speleological Association, they described standing at its mouth like standing in front of the mouth of a dragon. The humid air that gushed out of the cave's opening felt like the sticky exhalation of a fire-breathing beast. Unfortunately, there are no fire-breathing monsters inside the cave. It's mostly water. In such a dry and hot place, it's a bit of a shock to find an unlimited source of water hiding just underneath the surface. After scrambling down into the depths of the cavern for hundreds of feet, there is an underground lake. This lake is so deep that divers have no idea how deep it really is. They've only managed to go about 400 feet down, and still the darkness of the subterranean world stretches on before them. But this place is not devoid of life. It's filled with unique species of catfish, and almost certainly other creatures that have yet to be found. The cave is incredibly difficult to reach in the first place, and then even harder to explore. There could be all kinds of creepy, eyeless creatures hiding in its dark corridors and flooded passages. Haunted castle ruins. In the year 1303, King Edward I of England was leading a campaign to conquer the Scottish people. He passed through Nairn on his way to battle and stopped to rest at the foggy and mysterious Rate Castle. The castle was built by the Comyn family less than a decade before the king passed through. The king was good friends with the Comyn. Fast forward to 1442, and the Comyn family, now known as the De Rate family, invited the powerful Macintosh clan to their castle for a feast. The two families had been at each other's throats for decades, and the feast was supposedly to resolve the feud over food and wine. But in reality, the Comyn family was planning to murder their dinner guests. The Macintoshes were tipped off about the scheme, went for dinner anyway, but brought concealed weapons underneath their clothing. The dinner erupted in violence when the Comyns pulled out their swords, and what followed was a brutal slaughter. The fighting killed just about everyone in attendance at the dinner, with heavy casualties on both sides. The chief of the Comyn clan blamed his daughter for alerting the Macintoshes and thwarting the attempted assassinations, so he chased her up the castle stairs to her bedroom. As she tried to jump from a window to escape his wrath, he caught her and cut off her hands. It was shortly after this that the castle was abandoned, and today the creepy ruins are supposedly haunted by a girl with no hands. The Temple of the Flayed Lord. Archaeologists in Mexico recently uncovered a horrifying temple that was dedicated to the god Chipe Totec. He was the Flayed Lord, god of skinning humans. He sounds like a deity a deranged serial killer might worship, but in reality he was a popular god of the Popoloca indigenous people over 1,000 years ago. According to researchers with Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, this was the first time anyone discovered a cult center dedicated to Xipe Totec. Archaeologists uncovered altars, sculptures, and monumental stone figures representing flayed victims and skinned skulls. They were all discovered in the state of Puebla, which was occupied by the Popoloca before it was conquered by the Aztec. The Temple of the Flayed Lord was most likely built around the year 1000, and although the god was worshipped by the indigenous people who came before the Aztec, he was absorbed into Aztec mythology. The Aztec associated him with fertility, war, and agriculture. It was only during the spring festival that the Aztec turned to Xipe Totec as their god of violence. The Aztec would hold gladiator combat trials in which sacrificial victims killed one another. They would also tie victims up and shoot them with arrows. Once they were dead, these victims would have their skin peeled off and worn by priests and other ritual participants for days on end. The Mermaid Shrine. There is a terrifying place in Fujinomiya, Japan called the Tenshu Kaiusha Shrine. The shrine dates back centuries and is situated in a dark and isolated corner of the woods near Mount Fuji. There is no public transportation that goes to the temple, and it's attended only by the dedicated Shinto order at Fujinomiya. According to the story of the shrine, The mysterious creature kept within its walls was supposedly first seen by Prince Shotoku at Lake Biwa 1400 years ago. The creature told the prince how it had once been a fisherman who trespassed in protected waters and was turned into a hideous beast as punishment. It was mutated into a disgusting, pointy-toothed freak, then forced to live the rest of its life as a gruesome mermaid monster in the lake. The mermaid asked the prince if he could make a shrine to display his body after he had passed, so that it could be a lesson for other fishermen thinking about fishing in sacred waters. The prince founded a temple, displayed the creature's corpse, and its mummified remains are still there today. Whether the creature in the shrine is indeed a cursed mermaid, a bizarre taxidermy creation, or a mutant pulled out of the lake, nobody knows for sure. But whatever it is, its gross body is on showcase for any brave enough to seek it out. And now for number 6. But first, wanted to give a big shout out to Denver Gill and Rissa Crazy Clan for supporting this channel. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. The haunted Edington Park Hotel. The Edington Park Hotel in the UK is a luxurious place to spend the night. It's a 4-star hotel with approximately 46 rooms, as well as an on-site restaurant, cafeteria, and pool. Its history dates back over 2,000 years. Archaeologists have found evidence of human habitation going back to before the days of Christ. The hotel itself used to be a Roman villa in the days of Roman-occupied Britain, and finally the hotel was a mansion before it was ever turned into a lodging. There was a manor house standing on the property going back to at least the 12th century prior to the reign of King Henry III. It was around 1509 that Sir Ralph Shirley leased the manor, and over the years the structure was modernized, rebuilt, and refurbished. The property remained in the Shirley family until 1983, when the structure was handed over to the Isis Hotel Company and turned into a luxury hotel. The Shirley family still owns the land and pretty much the entire surrounding area. The Edington Park Hotel is considered the most important high Victorian house in all of England. And now for the terrifying part. The ancient house is supposedly haunted by multiple resident ghosts. The spirit of a woman named Lady Emma is notorious for appearing to guests and then disintegrating through the walls. She is believed to be a former governess who died under suspicious circumstances, and her soul refuses to leave the property. People have also witnessed a monk wandering about the grounds, an army officer, and 2 young Shirley boys who drowned nearby in the early 1800s. Creepy Arkansas. There's a creepy hiking trail in Arkansas that takes its visitors straight through the ruins of a mysterious lost village. The trail is within the borders of the Toltec Mounds Archaeological State Park. The park was once home to a group of Native Americans known today as the Plum Bayou culture. They lived in the area starting around 650 AD and then vanished 400 years later. The group is shrouded in mystery because archaeologists have never been able to trace their origins or figure out what happened to them. Some believe the Plum Bayou culture originated from the Toltec tribes in Mexico, but that's never been confirmed. There are no structures left behind by these people, but there are approximately 18 mounds within the park. These mounds were once used for ritual activity, with flat-topped platforms for feasts, planning, social gatherings, and much more. This would have been a large and impressive complex on par with many other Native American sites across the U.S. But it's not the mounds that make the hiking trail so creepy. The village mysteriously disappearing is definitely strange, but it gets even stranger. Visitors have reported hearing phantom footsteps and even seeing floating orbs like concentrations of spirit energy in the park at night. The Meat Eater. In Turkey, the Assos necropolis can be found in the ancient city of Assos. The city was founded around the year 1000 BC by colonists from Lesbos. The settlers constructed a grand temple to Athena on top of a craggy peak in 530 BC. The region prospered, and Assos turned into one of the philosophical centers of the ancient world. Aristotle was married to Pythia here in 348 BC, and everything was going just swell. But then the Persians invaded a few years later, and everything changed. Even after Alexander the Great drove the Persians out in 334 BC, Assos never reclaimed its former glory. It wound up being absorbed by the Roman Empire and just becoming another city lost to history. And yet there is something special about the Assos necropolis. These stone sarcophagi hiding down in the dark and creepy depths of the graveyard are meat-eaters. These sarcophagi have the uncanny ability of devouring a corpse within 40 days flat. Any body buried in the stone sarcophagi will supposedly decompose unnaturally fast, with the skin and meat and muscle practically melting off the bones. As of right now, scientists don't fully understand what causes the bodies to decompose so rapidly. Nobody knows why these stone boxes in this long-lost cemetery can quite literally eat human flesh. The research is ongoing, but right now it's still a mystery. The cave down under. In July 2022, the deepest newly discovered cave in Australia was named after a variant of the coronavirus. Explorers squeezed their way through unexplored passages and tunnels under the surface of Tasmania. These cavers were with the Southern Tasmanian Caverniers Organization, a brave crew who ventured 1,316 feet deep. It took about 14 hours for the team to explore the subterranean system. The caverns down there are creepy, totally dark, humid, and almost completely out of this world. They came across a waterfall sending cascades of cave water 535 feet into a frothing black pool. It was like something from an alien planet. Ben Armstrong, who was part of the exploration, said it was all very vertical. It required hundreds of feet to be ascended and then descended using ropes. Even though the Delta variant, as the new cave has been called, is the deepest in all of Australia, it's still not the deepest or most terrifying in the world. The deepest known cave is currently Veryovkina Cave in Abkhazia, which descends under the surface 7,257 feet. Medieval monks with worms. Archaeologists with the Cambridge Archaeological Unit in England recently examined the remains of 19 medieval monks buried at the Pease Hill Augustinian Friary. The friary dates back to the 11th century, and the medieval monks were found to have been riddled with worms. The researchers extracted soil samples from around the pelvises of the skeletons. What they found inside the soil was the remains of worms and larvae. 58% of the monks were infected with worms, which was extraordinarily high when compared to the local townsfolk in Cambridge. When the team took similar soil samples from people buried in the nearby town, they found only 32% of the locals to be infected with worms. This was highly unexpected because monks should have had better access to washing facilities than peasants. Monks at a monastery usually had latrines and running water, whereas commoners buried their waste in holes in the backyard. So why were medieval monks at this friary so filthy? The main theory is that it's because they used human waste as fertilizer for their vegetables. The monks may have had access to cleaning facilities, but they likely handled their own waste much more than ordinary peasants. They used their waste as fertilizer, so worm larvae were transferred to vegetables, then eaten by the monks. This led to repeated parasitic infections, which is why most of the monks buried in the cemetery had suffered from worms almost all their lives. Disturbing tomb marker. Archaeologists discovered the grave marker of a man named Jacob while they were excavating the Beit She'arim cemetery in Israel. The necropolis is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, dating back over 1,800 years. It also contains the bodies of some of the first people to convert to Judaism. Jacob's grave was not found, only his grave marker. Researchers say his tombstone had most likely been separated from his grave during a looting expedition by grave robbers. His final resting place is unknown, but that might be for the best. His gravestone was discovered with a ghoulish message on it, one warning everyone to stay away from his final resting place. The grave marker has his name clearly written in what appears to be blood. He was known during his life as Jacob the Proselyte, and he had recently converted to Judaism. The rest of the message on his tombstone reads, "Any who open this grave will be cursed." Clearly, Jacob didn't want anyone messing with his bones after he was gone. He even went out of his way to paint the message in red to mimic blood. Thanks for watching! Which of these creepy places would you love to visit for yourself? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!